We're just waiting a second to make sure we're live on YouTube. We back? Okay, I apologize to anybody who's watching and listening in. Zoom went down for a while, and we had an internet disruption here too. So I think we're good. We're all back and going to carry on. So where we left off was the setbacks on properties in the waterfront area. And I think Councillor Jaglowitz had just asked that we have some clear wording. Councillor Jaglowitz?
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder, I did have a chance to take a look at the sections, and I wonder if I might address that, because this will tie in my point 3 here. So the first thing is I looked at, and I apologize to other council, I don't have the page numbers, but I'm giving the section numbers, and that's, if someone could give the page number, because there are 2. Like under policy E4 2.2 are general policies that apply to all development. And this is the section I think you're referring to. And it talks about the role of the natural vegetated shorelines in buffering water bodies from erosion, siltation, and nutrient migration adjacent to the sensitive littoral zone is critical to the protection of water quality. And here's where the problem comes in. Preservation and restoration, comma, where appropriate. So right off the bat, it's qualified. Of shoreline buffers is therefore required. So it's only required where appropriate. Then it says, in this regard, as much of the area adjacent to the shoreline as possible shall be maintained into a natural state. So it's where appropriate, as much as possible, where new lots are being created and where construction and reconstruction on existing and new lots is proposed. But then it goes on again to say, except as otherwise permitted in this plan, the vegetative buffer shall stretch across the entire waterfront and be at least 15 meters in depth. So that's the taking both sides of the water and so on. And then it says where reconstruction is proposed on an existing lot, the shoreline buffer as it exists shall be protected and should be improved to the extent feasible through ecological enhancement where possible. But then it goes on in F, and it talks about the minimum 20-meter setback from any shoreline shall be required for all construction, excluding shoreline structures, open docks, and minor structures, unless a greater setback is required by this plan and or a lake plan, or a lesser setback is permitted where redevelopment is proposed in accordance with section E6. And then we go to E6, which says, and it talks about all new construction shall be 20 meters back. But then it says, the implementing zoning bylaw shall include appropriate provisions to permit a limited amount of construction in this setback area to both minimize hardship in a circumstance where development has already occurred and or topographical or other site features warranted, where such construction is being considered through site plan approval and or minor variance processes, it shall be conditional upon demonstrating a net improvement. So, and then we even go farther, and we talk about the policy relating to site alteration. And it says we're not even going to talk about site alteration here, other to indicate that that's in the site alteration bylaw. It says the intent of the updated site alteration bylaw is to ensure that site alteration be minimized to the extent feasible, commensurate with the size of the lot. In addition, reducing the amount of site alteration proposed will be a factor when considering making decisions on site plan applications. And then we go back to the consultant's summary, and they indicate in both F and G of their changes that the proposed maximum amenity area coverage is deleted from the OP and dealt with in site alteration bylaw. And they say the same thing for maximum site alteration. And so you have to jump all over the place, and there's exceptions all over the place. It would seem to me and this is in my humble opinion, that when we go back to the part that defines it, which is in E, if I can find it now, and this is the problem. So if we go back to, I had it marked as 1, the waterfront area, E422, why isn't it all there? And why aren't there clear statements that things are to be protected? And I'm sorry to jump all over the place, but it just seems to me that there's just too many wiggles and turns, and I'd like to see something stronger. Thank you.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes, thank you, Chair Bridgman, to you, Councillor Jaglowitz. Thanks for that. I mean, you've pretty much expressed the various places where this issue is dealt with. And I guess my first response is that official plans are not bylaws. They're intended to be directory. They're intended to provide direction to decision makers when making decisions on minor variances and site plan approvals, and obviously to provide direction to the zoning bylaws. So whenever we use where feasible and where appropriate, those are included because it's not possible in all circumstances to achieve a policy that is black and white in an official plan. And that's why we do that on purpose. Having said that, with respect to section E422B in particular, we've actually strengthened that section in this iteration of the OP by making sure that the vegetative buffer shall be required. It said before should. And we've also indicated that where reconstruction is proposed on an existing lot, the shoreline buffer as it exists shall be protected, instead of saying the shoreline buffer should be achieved to the extent feasible through ecological enhancement. So we've made some updates to reflect that. And when you're talking about, reconstruction on existing lots, there is a long-standing permission in the zoning bylaw to recognize that many existing dwellings are within the 20-meter setback, and there are very limited permissions in the zoning bylaw that allow for additions and reconstruction within that setback area, subject to criteria being fulfilled, and obviously subject to whatever the site plan agreement directs that person to do. And we're saying in those circumstances, they have to demonstrate a net improvement over the existing situation in some way, shape, or form. These are all enhancements over the existing official plan. And at the end of the day, yes, when you look at all of it, maybe we could say that a little bit more clearly, and we could look at that. But the reason we put in where feasible in some cases is very deliberate, because there are some cases where it is not possible, and there is a need to consider other alternatives, other approaches that demonstrate some net gain, but perhaps it's not exactly in the way the official plan envisions it. And perhaps Mr. Pink can weigh in on this, because he deals with these on a daily basis. And one of the challenges we have in writing policy in a place like Muskoka Lakes is that there are so many different contexts and so many different properties that sometimes they each require their own individual solution to achieve the objectives of the official plan. And that's why we use words like where feasible. However, the bottom line is the 15-meter vegetative buffer is a requirement across the entirety of the lot. That has to be protected when reconstruction is proposed. And if there is any development occurring within the setback, within this 20-meter setback area, there has to be a net improvement demonstrated through that process. And those three things are enhancements over the existing policy framework and the official plan. David, anything to add to that?
Mr. Pink?
Thank you. Through you, just really quickly, I agree with Mr. McDonald's points. I think where I do concur, I think we can look at a bit of the formatting to make it more clear for the community. At shoreline buffers, front yard setbacks, they too tend to be scattered a little bit throughout the waterfront, the current waterfront section, and we can certainly look at trying to improve that for clarity and for readability. That I acknowledge. However, I would agree completely with Mr. McDonald. It's very clear there's a shoreline buffer requirement across the entire frontage. I can assure you that staff diligently reviews every site plan application and ensures that as much plantings as is reasonable and as possible is proposed on those developments. But I think you have to build in a little bit of flexibility. There are certain situations, take, for example, a property that has extensive rock outcroppings along the shoreline. I don't think you want a definitive black and white requirement in policy that, that terraces be put in just to plant out those rock outcrops. I think we need to look at each lot and achieve the general objectives of the official plan. These policies, as largely written, are currently in the current plan. I think they work quite well. They're the most stringent across the district that I'm aware of. It requires that buffer across the entire frontage. But again, we do allow minor accessory buildings within, and we do allow and recognize and consider redevelopment of existing buildings that happen to be within that buffer. So those are longstanding permissions that have been in our official plan and zoning bylaw for many years, and are often debated during these processes. But I think there has to be some recognition, given that some historical development exists, and it's not always beneficial to push that back.
Just one supplementary, and then I'll let others speak. So where in the OP does it prevent somebody from clearing all of the vegetation other than 1 inch in diameter at breast height from their lot?
Would like to answer that.
Well, I'll ask David to speak to this, because there is a tree protection bylaw that also applies in addition to site alteration. So the OP does not say that directly because it's dealt with in other instruments. David?
Hang on.
I guess to be clear on the question, Councillor Jagowitz, is that the question is whether vegetation less or smaller in size than 1 inch diameter at breast height?
Yes, as we found out the last few days, that the tree preservation bylaw does not protect anything that does not have a diameter of 1 inch or greater at breast height, correct?
So thank you, that's correct. And I believe this was raised at the last, I forget which meeting, it must have been the planning committee meeting last week. And as we stated, that is correct. Currently, the tree preservation bylaw only prohibits tree removal for vegetation that's larger than 1 inch diameter at breast height. And again, we staff are open and look to direction from council if you wish to control removal of vegetation smaller than that size. I think, as I mentioned at the planning committee meeting, I think the intention is good, that smaller vegetation is very important, but I think council needs to be cognizant of the difficulties in enforcing that type of provision. It will pose significant challenges to control everyone's, brush removal and thinning of that type of vegetation.
And in addition, a person is free to have any number of patios, walkways, anywhere in that front yard, as long as it does not result in tree removal, which is the 1 inch at breast height, or site alteration. So it really doesn't deal with the issue. It's inspirational. It's trying to encourage people to protect it. I think it needs to be stronger. I will leave it at that. I've taken too much of your time. Those are my views. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that's what Councillor Jagowitz just covered. My point is that it's free game for all the shrubs and the plantings I've done across the front of my property if I was to sell it, and we know the district is really promoting that whole ribbon of life, but we have nothing in the township that protects it. And I think it's needed, and I don't know how we're going to answer it through the OP, but that's maybe we could ask our consultants to come up with ideas and how we could protect it. And then if we can get something in the OP, then maybe we can move it into the site alteration and tree preservation or plant preservation bylaw.
Mr. McDonald, your thoughts on that?
Certainly, we can consider providing some direction on that. I'm kind of hesitant because it is a site alteration / tree alteration bylaw discussion. I'm a little concerned, as David is as well, about being overly prescriptive and and you ending up in a place where something is either unenforceable or unwieldy. I'd also want to think about, and I think David would do this as well, is look to see if there are other best practices out there with respect to dealing with the smaller brush and the smaller trees on properties, and whether that makes sense. I think most people would think that something small in their property is fair game to remove or alter or plant, and would understand that something bigger is more worthy, if I can put it this way, of protection. And my last comment is creating a bylaw framework that requires every brush to be protected would consume considerable resources, I think, in the township, and may not be actually enforceable. But those are my comments. We can certainly look to making that clearer in the official plan that that's a goal and it is an aspiration, but how that's implemented is a discussion that goes beyond the official plan.
A supplemental, Madam Chair, I'll be quick.
Go ahead.
Then I think through to Director Pink, you had mentioned when we had this discussion last week that perhaps if people did that, there was other policies or rules that could help us there. And I think we got to have that discussion, because I agree, it'd be impossible to enforce. But we've got to do something to protect it. We just say, that ribbon of life is the lungs of our, everything lives with it or gets life from the first 25 feet either way from the shoreline. So
one thing I'll add to this conversation too, maybe it might provide some members of council with some, or planning committee with comfort, is because of the enhanced site plan control requirements in this official plan, many more properties will be subject to site plan control. And through that process, you can then have those conversations with landowners about the ribbon of life and about protecting certain areas. And certain areas on properties can be prohibited from any development or site clearing through site plan agreements. And there are monitoring provisions and so on that come along with that. So I think many of your objectives will be met through the enhanced site plan control requirements that are being established by the official plan. And I'm pretty sure Mr. Pink will be able to confirm that. Every time there is a site plan application, you do get a better outcome in terms of protecting vegetation on a property. And because this OP will require site plan approval in many more instances than currently, you will be achieving that objective through that process. David, any comments on that?
Director Pink.
Thank you. That is an excellent point. In our typical site plan residential agreement, there's no reference to 1-inch diameter at breast height. We make it very clear in site plan agreements that vegetation and alteration is not permitted outside of identified permitted envelopes for either buildings, structures, or those amenity type features. Those are very thorough, but I think, again, you just need to step back a little. I think, again, I don't disagree with the intention at all and the importance of that ribbon in life and keeping that vegetation. But I think you just, council encouraged to be cognizant of staff's ability, the municipal resources to really control everyone, shrubs, tall grasses. It's very difficult to police that volume of activity. And I think there's a certain expectation in the community that they're certainly permitted to make those types of changes to their property. But a site plan agreement will generally prohibit that work from occurring. I believe the majority of our ratepayers do leave those shoreline areas intact, save for reasonable access points and views. I do believe that is the current practice, and it works fairly well. So Mr. McDonald is correct by subjecting more properties to the site plan process. the more agreements we have in place will actually be more prescriptive, be more detailed, will be really crafted for the property in question, and they will be more stringent than our tree preservation and site alteration bylaw, which are more overarching tools. Thank you.
Okay, just on that note, after our last meeting, the Muskoka Lakes Association sent over they have a Shorelines webinar, which is really, really terrific, which addresses how important that is. So they did send that over to Mr. Kennedy, who I believe is looking at some sort of communication on that. I think education is a fairly major part of this. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you. To the chair, when we're doing site plan too, we want to get the shoreline vegetation native as well, because one of the presentations we had, they're deeper rooted plants. They save the soil better rather than saying, somebody putting in annual flowers that are something, and that we've got to start looking after the environment. And that should be covered somewhere. Thank you.
Are you asking that's covered in the OP, Councillor Edwards?
It would probably be under site plan control, but if Mr. McDonald can probably say where it should be, and that place, if something is in the OOP, it would help, I'm sure. Just saying that we vegetate with natural vegetation. Thank you.
Mr. McDonald?
I'm fairly certain, and I can do a search, that there is a direction in the official plan to plant native species and not non-native species in these types of circumstances, but we'll certainly make sure that's the case. I'm pretty sure it's in there already.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz.
Just one last thought that came to me, and if you all remember Commissioner Hastings, Samantha Hastings, who has left the district, but I can recall when we were going through the Mary Jane Lake situation, I had a discussion with her about how we can control the type of development on a small sensitive lake like that. And she took me aside and she said, Frank, what you have to realize is that if you don't want any cottages on Mary Jane Lake, then your official plan has to say no cottages on Mary Jane Lake. And that has stuck with me. And so if we leave wishy-washy statements in our OP, that means people that have lots of money can make the argument that their ZBA is fine because it conforms with the wishy-washy OP. So I really just hope you take the time to just straighten out that wording and get rid of all the wiggles and turns and try to say what you mean. In other words, leave the doggone thing alone. And if you need to touch it, maybe they have to go through a minor variance or something. Maybe we need a process. But anyway, thank you.
Okay, so have we finished I think we've finished our discussion on this area, and we're going to just leave the OP as it is, unless I've got any more feedback on this. Okay, so the next is, and this is page 332. I did manage to find it while we were chatting. Development of islands less than 0.8 hectares. And yeah, I know. Councillor Roberts, I hate to identify you again, but maybe I can get you to kick this off because it was on your list.
Unmute. Good. Thank you, Madam Chair. And just give me a second to open the document. And it would be state laws. I had so much in here and in no particular order. And trying to find it. Main floor of boathouses. Let's see. Control dogs. Can you just give me a second? I can't find my notes on this. Sorry, I apologize. So we're going to have to move on because I can't find them at this time. Am I being heard?
Sorry, that's fine. So are we talking about aggregates now?
Oh, no, yeah. Now aggregates, that's a subject that, within a few hours, I have received 2 or 3 emails with input from the constituents concerned with aggregates, and I have not had time. And it's just, so it's going to have to be postponed as well. Again, it goes back to the volume of interest in these subjects, and for us to really get into it and sound informed. I just can't talk to aggregates this time.
All right, I'll bump it over to another day.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Just reading on page 332, 4E53A, and basically you undeveloped islands, and that shall not be used. Okay, but then it says may be permitted. Okay, so then like that gives a loophole. I can see if it's grandfathered, but why are we going through this that may be permitted when we're saying that you can't? Undeveloped islands shall not be used for residential purposes.
Okay, I think Mr. Pink would like to respond to that.
Thank you. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Roberts, but I believe the references you're looking for is again, section E453, islands less than 0.8 hectares. It's on page 332 in your agenda packages. And just to be very clear on what this policy allows and doesn't allow in relation to the current OP, as well as I believe where this is stemming from, the comments made by the MLA and Friends of Muskoka yesterday. Our policies have always prohibited development of islands less than 2 acres. That's in the current draft and in the current OP. However, our current policy and this draft does give consideration to developing an island slightly less than 2 acres. It does give consideration to that. The current official plan lists a number of criteria that need to be met, one of which is an environmental impact study. The current draft does not have the environmental impact study as a requirement, and the comments we heard yesterday are to consider adding that back in. I'm not opposed to that addition, and I see Mr. McDonald nodding, and I think that's the entirety of the concerns related to this.
Okay, so
Yeah, thank you.
I'll let you come back, Councillor Edwards, but I'm going to guess the committee is in agreement that that study needs to be added back in. I have. Okay, all right. Councillor Edwards, did you have another comment?
No, it was just a case of what I'm saying is we're looking at the environment. Undeveloped islands less than 0.8 hectares shall not be used for residential purposes, but they can be limited to a picnic shelter and dock. And then we say, but may be permitted. So
are you asking that we have a look at removing that?
Well, I'm just asking what the committee are looking at, because like I say, I'm just one person, but if it's like, it's different if it's grandfathered. But if it's an undeveloped island, you can put a picnic shelter on it. But if we're saying shall not, it's saying you can't, and then we're saying but maybe. Like
I hear you. Okay.
And that I'm just asking that question. What do we want? Thank you.
Okay, I'll let Councillor Jaglowitz speak, and then I'll ask committee.
I agree with Councillor Edwards on this point. It's once again, this is an official plan, and all that's permitted, all that you have to do to be able to have a residence on this is you merely have to have slightly less than that. Well, what the heck is slightly? Okay, and then you have to meet these criteria. Well, that just means you have deep pockets and you hire somebody and they just do a report. That's what Samantha Hastings was referring to. All you have to do is think about the person with the proper environmental credentials that says, yes, it and then the official plan permits it, therefore the zoning bylaw has to allow it. So let's make up our mind. I think we should restrict it. Thank you.
Okay, Mayor Hardy.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to know where we've been at on this in the past. Is this new? I mean, did we allow some development on 0.8 hectares of land or not? I guess I look at this as the inverse of, we have a 10% lot coverage on generally the larger lakes, but we allow up to 11%. To me, this is the inverse, that you can't develop on the 1.97 acres, but we might occasionally allow a 1.8 acre island to be developed on. And I'm wondering whether or not that's another way to word this in thought. Indeed, it's difficult, hard lines. You know, we need a 300-foot lot to have a 2-story boathouse. And when somebody comes in with 298 feet or 299 feet, we say no. You know, there's a line in the sand, but there's some gray area in between. So I just, where have we been at in the past?
Director Pink.
Thank you. Again, the current policies are largely identical to the current draft. We don't prohibit, or the zoning bylaw implements the official plan. The 2 acres is the requirement. However, the current official plan does recognize that islands slightly less than 2 acres could be developed provided certain criteria are met. Over the years, not a common application. I can count certainly on one hand in about 20 years how many applications we've had to develop vacant islands slightly less than 2 acres. It's not overly common. I think, you know, certainly the other alternative, if council wishes to remove slightly less, you can certainly free to do so, and the policy will be clear that you require 2 islands to build. But the comment I would have, and Mr. McDonald may wish to add to that, there's extensive case law and tribunal decisions that OP policies are not read like a zoning bylaw. They're not read strictly. So even if the official plan said 2 acres is your requirement, if someone owned a 1.95 acre island and then submitted a zoning amendment, you know, likely the tribunal or planners will consider that rather than read it that strictly. So I think municipalities better off listing the criteria that will be considered in those situations to ensure that there are adequate soil depths, that the buildings are visually screened, the septic systems can be accommodated, that tree cover is retained, and I'm certainly supportive of adding the requirement for an environmental impacts study back in. But again, the alternative exists if committee wish. It's a fairly easy change to simply state that islands less than 2 acres shall not be developed.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm hearing from our director that you prefer not to put this in stone in the OP. Do I have agreement from committee that we are going, well, maybe I'll back that around. Do we wish to remove any allowance for some for an island less than 8.8? Councillor Jaglowitz.
I thought we were going to add in the requirement for a study, and if we
next
do,
on my question.
Okay, well, it's contingent one on the other. I would leave it as it. I would be okay leaving it as is if we do the requirement for a study.
Okay. Okay. Do we have agreement with that? If we're going to require the study, but we will leave this as written. I'm good with that. Anybody else? I think, yep, we have. Okay, there we are. Just study back in, please. Okay. So I'm not sure, Councillor Jaglowitz, if we've covered your 50-foot waterfront buffer and 15-foot ribbon of life adequately for you. Okay, great. The next is, we had a lot of delegates on Leonard Lake and the lake plan yesterday. Unfortunately, we see this more and more. It's almost neighbors against neighbors, but on the lake. My suggestion, and I went home and thought a lot about this last night, is that the Leonard Lake Stakeholders Association has been around for a long time. It is completely legitimate. It's completely transparent. They've spent a lot of time putting in this lake plan, and we had accepted it into our OP. I could find no information on the people who were opposing this. So where I sit right now is we have a legitimate organization for Leonard Lake. I would like to see this stay in as is. The people who spoke against it yesterday have every right to challenge this at OLT if they don't like it as it moves forward. And I would prefer to see that go. I don't know how we as a group make that determination here. And before you speak, Councillor Jaglowitz, I'm going to let Mr. McDonald speak.
Thank you very much. We certainly heard lots from a variety of people yesterday, and I echo your comments, Chair Bridgman. In the end, this is essentially a political decision that needs to be made on which lake plan should proceed, and I think it really is up to you as the elected body to make that decision. We've come up with policies that we think properly reflect the lake plan that was submitted. And we went back and forth and changed some of them with respect to boathouse prohibitions and so on. And we think we've come up with a solid plan for that lake based on the input that we've received.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Councillor Jaglowitz?
Thank you. I agree with you, Chair. I think you're taking the right approach, but I just have one question because I was a bit confused in some of the delegations. I understand, Mr. McDonald, that you have made some changes. You've edited the lake plan as it was submitted. Do I understand it correctly that the Leonard Lake Stakeholders Association agree with those changes or are in agreement with them? Or are they challenging some of those that you have made? It was unclear to me in the delegations.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes, so the only change we made was with respect to the prohibition on boathouses. Both Mr. Pink and I believe that it would be much more appropriate to establish more rigid criteria for boathouses instead of an outright prohibition, primarily because if we do a prohibition, a number of people will then take out building permits to get boathouses built, even if they don't want them, to protect their rights over the longer term. So we've come up with more restrictive provisions for boathouses that are more restrictive than on any other lake in that category in the township. It's not clear to me whether they are accepted by the association or not, and we expect comments to be received on that through this process and through the public meeting process, and after which we will then assess. But it's not clear to me whether they're on board entirely. I got the sense that they're open to the idea of there being more restrictive criteria, but we don't have a final word on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you're looking for the public meetings for that. Okay, and I should also say that this was Robert's list to talk about, but I see he's got his hand up here. Mayor Harding?
Thank you very much. I guess as we move through this in particular, I'm really trying to understand. It's nice to say our association, we represent a whole bunch of people, but as we start to impose some significant changes, I'd really like to know how many people are affected and how many people are on board. We heard the other association. Is it 3 people? Is it 5 people? Is it 200 people? So for those 2 associations, so to speak, that are listening to this, really love to get a number of your members. How many people would be in agreement? How many people would be opposed? And just because the Leonard Lake Stakeholders Association said yes, theoretically that could be 51% of the Stakeholders Association, or I think they said it's significantly higher than that. But how many numbers of people are we talking? Because ultimately we're being asked to make some decisions about Leonard Lake in its totality. So just looking forward to that. And that's not a comment that we're going to solve today. That's a statement for the associations on the lake to start to provide some names and addresses and people, some metrics around who they represent.
Yeah, I think we said that yesterday to Mayor Harding. It's true. So Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. I'm supportive of what was communicated by the chair. I think we leave it to the Leonard Lake Stakeholders Association to comment on their support of or their proposed changes during the public meeting. on the boathouses. So I'm supportive of this, and I agree with the mayor. It has to be clear and an equal identification, or like we got to compare apples to apples, not on who they are supporting. So I look forward to that, which was asked yesterday, and I'm sure the Leonard Lake stakeholders will come up with theirs fairly quickly. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So I think we are just going to leave this where this is now. And it's a discussion for a later day when we have more information. All right, so next we're moving on to resorts, and I've sort of got 4 subcategories here that I identified on the resorts. The first one was on islands, and Mr. Pink, I know this morning I said to you, I'm pretty sure Wigwassan Lodges, it's still on the geomap, a commercial property, and it's on an island. Do we have any more resorts that are not running as resorts that are on islands? That was the only one I could think of. Do you want to speak? Okay. Oh, hang on.
Thank you. Off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any other resort zoning on island properties. To be honest, I'd like to confirm even the Wigwassan Lodge. I'm happy to do that if council wishes. But keep in mind, I believe the direction or the comments received would really just pertain to new resorts. We wouldn't be looking to take away the rights of existing. And the current official plan does have a requirement for new resorts. I think this covers 2 of the bullets. One is a acreage and a frontage requirement, and the other is that it's on a mainland property. Those were not carried forward. I believe they were, that was inadvertent, and I'm seeing again Mr. McDonald nodding. We're certainly happy to add those back in. Thank you.
Okay, well then, Mayor Harding.
Thank you. Just a question, probably to Director Pink. Do we run the risk in some of these of when we say there's no new resorts on islands, and a resort that's on an island currently ceases to operate, which means it loses its operation status? Do we run the risk of creating a property, and I think the technical term is ultra vires, that we've zoned it, put it in a pigeonhole, says it has to be something, it no longer is something, and it can't be anything else because we can't theoretically downzone a commercial property? And I referred to Gull Island or Gull Rock Trailer Park in the past, where we had that same issue.
Mr. Pink?
Thank you. Through you, I don't believe that is a concern. If the property is zoned, then it would be permitted to resurrect if it ceased use. I think the situation would apply as if it was in a residential zone, ceased to operate, and then wish to resume operations. It may lose its legal non-conforming status at that point, depending on the length. I think the Gull Rock Tent Trailer Park is a very unique situation. If you remember, because of very unique policies and zoning provisions that don't allow tent trailer parks on our big 3 lakes. So that was a bit of a different situation there. And but I don't believe this is a concern. If again an island property is currently zoned to allow a resort, again that zone would permit that to continue.
Okay, so I think we're good on that. The next one I have is the occupancy of owners, and at the present time, it's 75% of the year, whatever that was, 39 weeks. So I know there are some questions about that. I'm wondering if, again, we wait until we get our public feedback before we have an actual discussion on this to see if we get any public input on this. That's just a suggestion. Happy to talk about it if you want. But Councillor Jagowitz?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask staff what the logic was for in a commercial property allowing 75% of the use to be residential. I just didn't follow that. Why that would be permitted, that's all. Was there some logic there? Mr.
McDonald?
Yeah, so there was a request actually made by the Muskoka Lakes Association and FOM to put something in the official plan on this, which caused us to think about what the policies were saying. So the policies basically say right now that it's 26 weeks that you can occupy your unit. So that's 50%. And then it says, well, if you don't have any rentals, then you can occupy it for more than the 26 weeks. As long as the 4 weeks in the summer is cleared off and available for the traveling public. So that's kind of the way it's set up now. So theoretically, if a unit wasn't rented for all weeks except those 4, that would be 48 weeks in the year that the owner can occupy it. And I think that the submission was that that's a pretty large number. There should be a number that's less than that. So I simply just took the middle and came up with 39 weeks and 75%. That's simply what I did, because I thought we should provide some direction so that the unit isn't occupied for the full 52 minus 4 weeks of the year. There should be something less than that. Whether 75 is the right number or not, I think, as Chair Bridgman indicates, that could be something that we could consider further after we receive public comments. But before putting in that 75%, there was no direction on that, and it theoretically could have been up to the 52 minus 4.
So just for the record, I'd support 31 weeks or 60%. So thanks.
Okay.
Okay, hold that thought till after the public meetings, Frank. Mayor Harding?
Just a reference. Can we get a page number on that again? Thank you.
I think it's 354. That's the whole section. Commercial resort development. Okay, so that was the second one. The third one was in terms of the mandatory rental program, if a resort ceases to operate, I'm thinking that it's just maybe not clear that the mandatory rental program has to continue. The condominium corporation would have to take that over and run it. Am I correct, Councillor Jaglowitz? I know this was one item that you were concerned about.
Yes, I think it's dealt with in F33. I'm sorry, I just having trouble referencing. I know but I think there's an inference in it now that it could carry on and operate residentially, and I don't think that should be permitted. In other words, if the resort fails, people would have to cease occupying it, or they'd have to in some way operate a rental pool, a rental program. I think that's the intent, so it stays commercial. That's all. I'm not trying to penalize anybody. People bought into a commercial resort with some residential use. If the main use isn't there, they shouldn't be allowed the residential use. But thank you.
So is that, if I could, Mr. McDonald, I thought that was probably covered through the fact that it has to continue to operate, even if the developer goes under or whatever. Could you just clarify that a little bit more, please?
Yes, certainly. And I think what the request is that there is a section in your existing official plan. It's section B11.11 that includes 4 items in it that basically specifies what should happen when a resort ceases to operate. And I took 2 of those items and carried them forward into this official plan. So those are the 2 that you see. But the 2 I didn't carry forward had to do with, and I'll just read it. It said, in the event the condominium units are unable to be operated as part of a tourist commercial use of the units shall cease until it's possible to operate them as such. I'm a planner, not a lawyer, but I have a hard time seeing how the township can prohibit someone from using their own unit. I just have visions of somebody knocking on a door and saying you have to vacate your premises, and I'm not sure that was in the intent or if that is actually legally enforceable. So what I did include in here is that the units and the property have to be carried on as a resort in accordance with all of the agreements that are registered on title and entered into between the municipality and the condominium corporation. So that's in there. And then the last item I didn't carry forward, and I'll just read it because it sounds very legal. It says the owners of all lands comprising the resort of which the condominium units form a part shall be considered partners with the condominium unit owners. And I don't know how the municipality can force someone to be a partner with someone else. So I did not include that clause in the updated official plan as well. So I've included what I thought was reasonable. There should be some direction on what happens when a resort ceases to operate. And I think if there are agreements in place, it has to occur in accordance with those agreements. If it's not occurring in accordance with those agreements, then the township has the ability to enforce those agreements. And that's what I've included in the official plan. I don't know if Mr. Pink has anything else to add to that, but that's what we've done.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't at this point in time. So,
Okay.
so Councillor Jagowitz, to answer your question, that would be an agreement that's signed with, I would think, the rental program is going to be part of those agreements that are signed. So please carry on. You have another
No,
question?
I just wanted to, can you just give me the full reference of that section? Just, I thought I had it, but. Sorry, you're mute, Nick.
Sorry, it's 357 use restriction.
That's section F332E.
Okay,
F332.
E. That's 357, page 357.
No, that's E is the.
Where a resort that includes condominium units substantially ceases to carry on
Oh,
business.
Sorry, do it again. F332
E.
Yes.
22E.
F332.
Oh, F332. Then there's 21. Oh, 2. Oh, I
It's
see.
page 357 in your
Gotcha,
agenda.
gotcha. Okay. So just summarize it again. What happens under this plan if the resort ceases to operate? What can the owners do?
Mr.
Well, they
McDonald?
According to what this says is that I'll just read it, because the owners may, through a centralized management, continue to operate the units as part of a tourist commercial use in accordance with the agreements registered on title, including those that deal with occupancy of the units. And then it goes on to say conversion of the resort use to residential use shall not be permitted.
Oh, okay.
So,
That's
you know, these are provisions in your existing official plan that were included some time ago. I'm not sure whether they've ever been applied or used. I have a hard time thinking that, given the way the resort policies are written, I'm very doubtful that there will be many, if any, resort applications made going forward. That's just my sense. But in a circumstance where a new resort is applied for, I'm going to assume that the township will be ensuring that the agreements entered into are very, very rigorous, and they will set out exactly what should happen in a worst case scenario where the resort ceases to operate. So I have some faith in a future agreement to deal with that.
But those agreements can be modified by the corporation, because that happened in the case of the Marriott. So that's fine. I think it should be clear. We can go through the process that they're not allowed to be used as residential units, which you stated, but maybe it has to say, and they can't occupy. You know, maybe you have to add a couple words that they then can't occupy. So anyway.
No, I think that was Mr. McDonald's point, that we can't kick them out.
Yeah, that's my point. That you know, and again, I'll ask Mr. Pink to weigh in on this if he thinks otherwise. But I just can't see how we can rely upon an official plan policy to not allow someone to occupy a unit that they've purchased.
But maybe if we reduce the occupancy to 60%, maybe that solves the problem.
It might, that will go a long way to do that.
Yeah, nobody is trying to prevent them from occupying, trying to prevent them from being used as a residence.
Right.
Which that would do. So, okay, I'll back off.
Okay, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, it appears that we're getting to the end line, the finish line on this. But I just want to bring in what happened at Friday Harbor. Have we positioned our like, I guess that could potentially happen in Muskoka if the resort ceased to operate.
So Friday Harbor is a very unique type of resort. It did go through a very rigorous planning process to get approved. The interesting thing about Friday Harbor is that it's not in an urban area, but it's serviced with full municipal services by the town of Innisfil, and there were official plan and zoning provisions that did restrict occupancy. And over time, as the resort continued to evolve and so on, there was pressure to change those agreements and those occupancy restrictions. And actually, there was a need to change all of the planning instruments to make that happen. So that's the local zoning, that's the local official plan. And I believe even the Simcoe County official plan had to be amended. So there was a full public process involved in changing the way that resort was to operate. That's what happened there. Many folks don't like what Friday Harbor looks like. That's a completely different conversation. But there is a long history with that is unique to that property. And each of the councils that had to make decisions initially on that then agreed to change the rules as well. So that's what happened there.
Just a quick supplemental, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Then that could happen possibly in Muskoka Lakes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I've learned that almost anything can happen in planning, actually, Councillor Roberts. Yeah, Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you. And I'm not going to dispense any legal advice, but I do want to go back to this theory that you don't have the right to remove somebody. If their right to occupy is governed by, and maybe this is what you're saying and I misunderstood, but if the right to occupy is governed by the terms of a contract or an agreement, the fact that they may be an owner doesn't give them the right to occupy other than under the terms of the contract. If they breach the contract, I mean, it's not a slant. You don't just get to walk up and kick them out, but it's like anything. If there's a breach of the contract, you can get an order and have them removed. And then you don't wind up with a failed, if I'm understanding the argument, with a failed resort hotel / condominium development that's actually turning itself or morphing into a residence. Or did I misunderstand something?
No, I think you've got it right, Councillor Kelly. It has to do with the agreements that are entered into between the municipality and the resort owner in terms of how, with the condominium corporation with respect to how that resort is to be occupied. And within that agreement, there will be occupancy restrictions, I'm going to assume, and those agreements are enforceable. And I think that's the most effective way to ensure, to the best of the municipality's ability, that the agreements will be implemented. However, I will never say never. As Chair Bridgman indicated, there may always be a circumstance where those agreements can't be enforced. There are mitigating circumstances at play. We don't know. All we can do is set it up such that they have to demonstrate very clearly how the resort is going to operate. They have to demonstrate many things as a result of this official plan. And I think many of the bars that we have established are very difficult to overcome. But if one does make it through, so to speak, I would more than anticipate the township will be very, very diligent in writing up agreements that protect the township's interests and what the intent of the township is with respect to that resort. So the devil's always in the details, but I do expect the township to be very diligent in making sure that that eventuality doesn't happen.
Councillor Kelly, you have any more?
I'm out.
Okay. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So right now, when we're doing these agreements, are they registered on title? And then is the owner required to register on title to every purchaser? Do we need a legal opinion on this, how we can strengthen it? Just a question.
Okay, so I think you could maybe answer, Mr. McDonald. I'm not sure this is part of the OP process.
I don't think it is. We're getting into quasi-legal and legal matters that I can't really opine on. Mr. Pink can certainly speak to what has happened in the past, but I can't opine on it any further than that.
So no, that wasn't to minimize it, Councillor Edwards. It's just that I'm not
And
sure.
that's supplemental. What I did say is, what are we doing with agreements now? Are we registering it on title? That was one of the things. And then must the owner of the resort register it on title when he sells it? That's what I had asked. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Director Pink, would you be able to? There you are. Please.
Thank you. I'm also not a lawyer, so I'm happy to chime in with my opinion for what it's worth. Just quickly would note that, yes, I believe referring to the condominium process, those condominium agreements are certainly registered on title. They're binding on future owners. Again, I would tend to agree with Mr. McDonald. It will be an enforcement discussion before the courts as to abiding by zoning bylaws and agreements. I really question how much a policy would come into play in that legal forum or avenue. So I believe the policies are clear. You cannot use it as residential. There will be agreements to that effect. The onus will fall, as much as it will be challenging, on the municipality to enforce said agreements.
Okay, are you good, Councillor Edwards? Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz.
Yes, I think this just might help just to give you an example of how the Marriott operates legally, and I have some firsthand knowledge of this, and it's probably the best example. So there is a condominium corporation that all the units are in, and it's a standard corporation, had its AGM last night, or the night before, last night actually. But then it has each owner individually has an agreement, a use agreement with the hotel operator, which is the Niagara Hotel Group in that particular case, not the condo corp. So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about whether the Niagara Hotel Group would cease operations and they would cease to operate it. The condo corp would remain, and the individuals still own their units. And now and what prevents them from occupying them is that agreement. Because in that agreement, which is registered on title, they've agreed to put them into the rental pool. So if that operator fails, that agreement becomes somewhat unenforceable. Now, what happened? That hotel started up many years ago, and then in 2018, through a dispute with the owners, all those agreements were rewritten, and that can all be done without the municipality being involved. So I think what's being asked here is just something that's clear in the OP that commercial units must remain commercial. And if the operator fails, it can't be turned into a residential. Now, as we all know, you can always go through a procedure, right? Through an OPA or something in that case. So I don't think the request is unreasonable, and it's, enforceability of that. So, but as I said earlier, if you can restrict the usage to say 60% or something like that, then you maybe have accomplished the same thing. So I'll leave it with staff to work out something. But the whole idea should be that can't end up being a residential condominium on the water with that density. Because as soon as you do that, then you're going to have all the boats, you're going to have everything that's associated with that. And you all have to have schools and everything to service all those people that live there. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jaglowitz. We'll keep that in mind once we get the public comments back in terms of what percentage is the right percentage. So, okay, and the last point on resorts, which Councillor Kelly had pointed out, and I'm going to ask you, Councillor Kelly, just to explain what's not in this new OP that you're questioning.
I think we covered it off already, did we not? I thought the first conversation about, are you looking at my number 3? Oh, you don't know, you don't see. Relating to island. I thought we already covered this.
So we did cover that off, Councillor Kelly. Mr. Pink mentioned that right off the top, that we would carry forward the minimum lot frontage, minimum lot area, and the prohibition on islands. So we will do that.
Okay. That's good.
All right, sorry. Okay, we're good. Okay, so now we are going to go to down zoning marinas. And I know, Councillor Jaglowitz, you had this on your list. Would you like to start us off?
Okay, so this is becoming the Frank show now. So
Page number, please.
I don't have a page number. Does someone?
Okay, so we'll look. Hang on.
12. So while do you want me to wait?
No, I think you can generally open this up.
I think that the ask here is that a downzoning of a marina only take place at the time of a comprehensive review or another township-wide planning process. Okay, and that that they not just, because they are important things to water access people and other usage, and therefore they shouldn't be. It should have to be a comprehensive review before they're stopped. And as far as where they're located, I think it's just obvious, just to protect the environment, they shouldn't be located in, on wetlands or shallow bays.
Okay, I think it's 3:35. Mr. McDonald?
Yes, so based on the whole water access discussion that we had a few meetings ago, we have strengthened the policies on marinas to recognize their importance, obviously locally, and to strongly discourage their downzoning. The closing of a marina is clearly a decision a marina operator can make, and there's nothing the township can do to stop a marina from closing. The request being made is that if that marina operator wants to change the zoning of their property to another use, that it not be permitted until another official plan review like this one is undertaken. I'm not really in support of that. I think that's overly onerous and is not really what the purpose of a comprehensive review is as per the provincial policy statement. The provincial policy statement requires comprehensive reviews if you want to convert employment lands to another use, such as industrial going to residential, and that is because of the importance of protecting jobs within any community. In this particular case, the starting point is quite different. And I basically look to the reality of the situation, and if a business owner decides to stop running their business, there's nothing we can do to stop that person from doing it. And if they want to rezone to another use, I am very certain there would be quite a bit of public interest in that and a very tough council decision to make as a consequence. So I'm satisfied that there would be a fairly rigorous process followed in that case, and requiring that person to wait 5 or 10 years for an official plan review to sort of make that pitch and application seems to be overly punitive, in my opinion. So that's my response to the request made.
Councillor Jacobus, are you?
Well, just so right now, the OP says the downzoning of existing marinas is strongly discouraged, and I think that's a nothing statement in my view. So if the ask is it should be a more serious procedure.
Okay.
So, wait for public comment.
No, actually, I'm actually going to ask committee, because I agree with Mr. McDonald on this. So I'm going to ask committee if we have any desire to entertain what Councillor Jaglowitz is saying. Much stronger wording, and you can't change. You can't ask to downzone a marina until a comprehensive review. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. Given what occurred or could have occurred up in the Skeleton Hill area, I think that we need to have more serious wording. Maybe not a comprehensive review, but there's got to be something that we should put in place, because we lose it. If we had lost a marina up in Skeleton Lake, I know the constituents who purchased island properties, knew they bought beside an airport when they bought it, but it really does put a problem back on us to solve. So I think it's got to have a little more than just what's currently written. Those are my thoughts. I don't know whether any more ideas.
Well, I think to your point, you can't stop a marina from closing, though. Mayor Harding?
Thank you. I guess the question, so, and, you know, certainly we want to discourage downzoning, which I agree with. I'm not sure we can sit there, it sits negative or it sits empty. I mean, if they go bankrupt, the lake people are not going to have any benefit of the marina anyway. The only question I ask is there an opportunity to put some parameters around if they were to downzone? These are some things. I'm not going to wait for a new OP review. That could be 10 years, 15 years from now. But the question being, if they were considering downzoning, do we retain some of the features of the existing marina? In other words, docks available. And I think that's the biggest thing, that we must retain the docks available to service the other lake properties. Whether or not they sell gas on the lake, who cares? But car parking and docking as a waterfront landing characteristic, I think, is important. And maybe we write it in there that if it's contemplated in any way, shape, or form, that these features must be retained.
Mr. McDonald?
That's a great idea, Mr. Mayor. We actually have something similar for the downzoning of resorts, particularly if they offer access to island properties and so on, that through that process, that every effort should be made to retain some or all of that access so that it's not lost. I can see a similar approach being taken for marinas. So I think that's something for sure that we can include in the official plan going forward.
Okay, great. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you. I agree with the mayor on this. We've got to do something because island and that property, they need boat dockage, they need it. And that just because somebody has a marina, yeah, they might shut their gas down, but they should have a commitment to the islanders and that they're renting to and others, because we're not going to get new marinas and that's we have to save the existing ones. And just because somebody can maybe make a buck on something else quickly, I think we should be protecting the islanders, or we're going to have to start providing it ourselves, and I don't want to do that. Thank you.
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you. I have a real problem with this. I don't understand how, I mean, I understand the down zone question, but I don't understand how we can hamstring somebody and say, you will be a marina operator. You know, we don't, it just, to me, it flies in the face of all the freedoms we have. Nobody's an indentured servant here. I don't know how we could ever get away or make something like this that would be enforceable. If the marina is failing or it's up for sale, it's because there's a higher value on it. And I don't mean a monetary value. I mean, there's a higher calling. You're not making money yesterday, this year, from dock space and gas sales. Being forced to operate something that offers dock space and gas sales doesn't make it profitable. So I just have a really difficult time with this one. And I understand the importance. Believe me, nobody, we all do. But I hear Councillor Edwards saying we don't want to do this. Well, either does the operator of the marina, except we have the ability to force it. And to me, that I'm a bigger believer in the market. If somebody is tired of his operation, can't make a go of it, there will be a price at which it will operate. And cash flow, and somebody will be able to make it work. But I don't know how you can force somebody to continue something that isn't working.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure we're forcing them to stay in business, Councillor Kelly. So I think what you're saying though is that the parameters of you have to keep the docks and you have to keep the parking is way too onerous, and who would ever buy a marina if you're tied to that? I agree with you, actually. Okay, Councillor Jagowitz.
So hence you now understand why the suggestion was that it not be downzoned. Because let's say a marina operator decides not to operate it, so it ceases to operate. Now, he could easily sell it off and parcel off as residential or some other use if he was allowed to through a simple change. But if he's prevented from doing that for a period of 5 years or some period of time, then that property will sit there and it will be available to somebody else to buy it, probably at a reduced price, and operate it. And I think that happened with SWS, I believe, even in Port Carling. And maybe it gives an opportunity for the lake owners possibly to form a cooperative and do something. So I think rather than trying to put restrictions on what they have to do, just by merely slowing down the downzoning process probably accomplishes the best we can. That was the reason for the recommendation. Thank you.
Okay. Mayor Harding?
Thank you. Just to comment, I think the reality for me is if they have to retain public access or waterfront access through the docks and parking, yes, the marina portion of it ceases to exist. Well, they've lost the business value of that. So now we're talking about land value. If they are considering downzoning, I certainly don't want to create another waterfront cottage on the lake. The business was there and designed in our official plan from day one to have access to island properties and non-car access properties. That I think we do have every ability to retain. And if at the end of the day, some John Doe wants to buy that property for $1 and maintain some docks and a parking lot, it's a cash cow. Look at Parker's Marina at Windermere. That's all they do. Some docks and a parking lot at $1,500 a slip annually. Do the math on that. That's probably one of the most lucrative and financially profitable businesses we have around here. It's like a self-storage building. So I don't think we're unduly telling somebody you have to sell ice cream, you have to fix boats, you have to pump gas. That I agree with you 100% is overstepping. But for them to retain those features, I don't believe of docks and parking is not unduly just on them.
Good discussion. Councillor Jagowitz. Your hand is up,
I
Frank.
was finished. I forgot to take my hand down.
Okay, that's fine. All right, well, I think this has been a good discussion, and I'm going to suggest that we just leave it as is till it goes out to the public, and then see what we get back from that, unless anybody feels strongly that we'd like Mr. McDonald to, Mayor Harding?
Thank you. I thought Mr. McDonald thought that he might have some additional language that we've used in other areas that should downzoning be contemplated, that we'd like to retain some features of the property. And I'd really like to see that go out to the public.
Actually, I agree with you. We need to put it out there front and center to get the reaction, I think. Councillor Edwards?
Yes, thank you. I would agree with Mayor Harding. We have to keep it. It's either that or we better be actually prepared to buy them, because you're not going to get other landings around and that, or the island or holding. It's different if a marina is in trouble, but it also is different if a developer buys a marina with the intent to shut it down, to turn it into something else. He knew it was a marina when he bought it. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're in agreement. Mr. McDonald, you can put in your wording, and we'll see what the public says. But I think, Councillor Kelly, your hand is down again. Okay. We're missing Councillor Mazan's magic hand there that goes up all by itself. All right, so our next one is RCC. We had a lot of comments. We had a presentation by the Small Lake Association yesterday, and I believe we're going to have a discussion on this. So, Councillor Kelly, maybe we could ask you to chime in, lead us off.
Just put my hand down. Thank you. Through you, I'm sorry. I was reading my own sheet here, and I missed. Are we on the issue of the definition of or the purpose of RCC, or my other comment?
Let's start with the definition before we go to the purpose.
Okay. All right. I have two issues. They're kind of related, and they kind of come down to enforceability, and they kind of really come down to whether or not we've appropriately and specifically enough defined how we're going to operate RCC in a non-hard cap environment, if that's indeed how we move forward. I think there are 8 factors which we've defined or called out as things which are variables that can be adjusted to solve a particular application for a new lot. My concern is that they are not prescriptive in any way. They're suggestive. There's not really any way for me to figure out, or anyone to figure out, that I can see how they work together. If one excludes the other, are they mutually exclusive? Do you have to use 3 out of the 8 or 5 out of the 8? I just think that from what we have all sort of learned the hard way through appeals, that more specificity is better than none, and I don't see enough here to see an enforceable arrangement if we have to have resort to those 8 issues. I might as well throw the other one in because it's not all that different. But my other concern is the way we set ourselves up. And this, I actually don't have a page reference, but I do have a copy in front of me at least. On E9 C1, if I'm reading this correctly, we're specifying or calling out that, actually it's C2, a CJ, that's not 1, that's an I, that the goal of introducing RCC to the OP is to ensure that the water, in this case, continues to provide an excellent recreational experience and remain safe and attractive. And I actually don't think that's why we're doing RCC. And I also don't think we have jurisdiction to regulate, to keep the water safe. Unfortunately, other bigger bodies than us do, like the federal government. So I'm trying to look at it and kind of put some science around it. I think RCC is a stand-in or a proxy for water quality, or sorry, not water quality, but for environmental quality and overdevelopment on the shore. I found a few, but I'm looking for more studies that will back that concept up. And really, what we're doing this for is to ensure that there isn't overdevelopment, and RCC will be one of several factors that we will measure to determine when we're close to that overdevelopment line, at which time we have to take action. And that keeps our involvement and our purpose for having RCC to specifically to causes over which we actually have jurisdiction and are free to regulate, and takes us away from somebody getting up and saying, you said right in here, you only put RCC in to regulate the safety and attractiveness of the water. I mean, that's not your job. That's my concern, is it's not, I don't know how we could enforce that. So they both kind of come down to enforcement. They both kind of come down to specifying things that we wish to do with a high enough degree of specificity that somebody can read it and understand it and live their lives according to it. And we aren't treading beyond the scope of authority that we have to regulate on anything. That's
Okay.
it.
Okay. It's page 343. If nobody's found it yet. Mr. McDonald, could you sort of comment? I understand where he's coming from. We don't regulate the water.
No, it's a good point, and this is a pretty challenging topic with lots of different angles and aspects to it. I guess when I look at RCC, I'm perhaps looking at it with maybe a more narrowed focus, and I'm really focused on the amenity that's provided by the lake that we're applying the RCC to, not necessarily to overdevelopment as a construct around the entirety of the lake. RCC is really designed to make sure that there are that the number of users of the lake are related in some way to the number of people who live around the lake in relation to the surface area of the lake. It is a calculation of some kind, and really the purpose of it is to restrict how much of that, how many people are using a common resource, which we don't have any other effective means of controlling. We get that. So we try to control it by restricting the number of new people that can come onto the lake and that is through new law creation. And as I mentioned in our last meeting in March, it seemed overly punitive to me to prohibit new law creation when we have no ability to restrict how people who already live around the lake use the lake, how many watercraft they have, what kind of people they are, and what they do on the lake and the activities they carry out. So it seemed to be overly punitive. So we ended up in a place where the RCC becomes one of the tools in a toolbox, and we came up with 8 factors, as Councillor Kelly indicates, that we could apply, or the township could apply, when new law creation is proposed. And it could be all of them applied, it could be one of them applied, it could be 3 out of 8, right? It really is up to the approval authority at the time. And again, if someone is proposing a relatively small lot, then I think many of these things would be applied. But if somebody said they wanted to create a 10-acre lot, for example, then, well, maybe we don't have to apply all of these because the lot is so large anyways. The number of people coming onto the lake as a consequence is much less than if it was 5 separate lots. So that's why it's written this way. They're basically tools that the approval authority would apply. And, we could think about, how these tools get used, but then we're into guideline territory and not official plan policy territory. So what we're trying to do is to identify all of the other things that are within your jurisdiction that you can apply and you can enforce if someone actually wants to make an application on the lake that is over capacity according to the calculation. That's really the approach we're taking. The list is fairly long. And you could say you can't have a dock if you want a lot, depending on the lake. But it really depends on the lake, the number of lots on the lake, what's proposed, and that's why it's written in this way. If you have a lake that is quite large and it's just over the recreational carrying capacity, you may not be as strict as a lake that is way over on the capacity and is smaller. So that's why it's written the way it is. We're certainly open to any suggestions on enhancements, but that's the philosophy behind writing this section, is to give the approval authority the ability to say, you want a lot, well, you're going to have a smaller house, you can't have a dock, no boathouses, no sun deck, dock length is less. These are all the things you can do to get at what we're trying to achieve, which is to protect the common amenity for the people that are around that lake.
Okay, a follow-up, Councillor Kelly?
One quick follow-up. Thank you for that, Nick. And I guess my only comment is I guess I'm more amenable to the issue of the 8 variables. But I can tell you that if I were acting for a disgruntled landowner who's trying to find a way to overturn this, it would be a short trial. We'd and I'm not real good, but it would still be a short trial. Because we set a trap for ourselves. I just don't think we're going to go very far by stating in the opening paragraph that we're all here to protect the attractiveness and safety of the water. Because I guess the next question is, if we can do that over the water, I'd like to protect the attractiveness and safety of the land, of the air above the water by banning float planes. I don't think I'd get away with that either. That's clearly not our jurisdiction any more than boats on the water are our jurisdiction, or not boats, crowding on the water. So I like RCC, and that's why I'm making the argument. I'd hate to see it bounced because we were a little loose with our definition. If the purpose of RCC is to stand as a proxy for overdevelopment and among other measures, then I think it will withstand. There's enough science, and there's a growing body of science being built and data being built around the relationship between RCC on water bodies and overdevelopment on the near shores. So if the definition is that it's a way for us to stick to our knitting, which is controlling overdevelopment on the waterfront, I'm all for it. I think it'll stand up to the scrutiny better if it's set up that way. Thank you.
So,
I think in reply, I just to quickly, because I think this could help with the conversation. In thinking about the intent, I think we could broaden it, Councillor Kelly, to get at more of the bigger picture that you're getting at, which is overdevelopment. So we're certainly open to that. we certainly started off there. It is a narrower focus, but I can certainly see the point and get that it is a proxy to control overdevelopment as well. And I think stating that would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. And I am thinking too, I mean, the other question here, I think we had a presentation yesterday that I found very dramatic in terms of the small lakes and the fact that this particular calculation takes into effect the shorelines. It does all of that. So I think we have a before us too. Are we going to do a hard cap on the small lakes? And if we put the hard cap in, I'm thinking that what we're talking about for the larger lakes, this is a tool with those eight criteria. I think we need to differentiate the two, and maybe I should have started with, do we want a hard cap on the small lakes? Anyway, that's it for now. I'll wait to hear what other people have to think. Councillor Jagowitz.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what you just stated. I'm in disagreement with the policy that's being proposed here, and in the notes that are provided, it says hard cap as it relates to lot create. I'm sorry, it has to do with the recreational care. Right, hard cap as it relates to lot creation to be deleted and replaced with enhanced criteria. I agree with it to be deleted and replaced with enhanced criteria on the larger lakes. But I believe there should be a hard cap on the small lakes, and there's good evidence of that. Now, maybe the calculation needs to be tweaked. Maybe it shouldn't apply to certain things, but it should apply, and it should even include urban centers. And I go back to, again, what Samantha Hastings from the district is saying. We should say what we mean. And this criteria thing, it's a nightmare. Also, RCC with a hard cap is proven. It's a proven technique. It works in other areas. I don't know why we have to invent it. So I'm very strong that we should retain it on the smaller lakes. And if it causes some results that don't seem fair, then you can tweak the formula a bit or whatever. But to not have a hard cap where a hard cap is appropriate, I think is a mistake. Because once again, as I say to people, if you want to build up in Muskoka, all you do is get your Toronto architect, put $200,000 aside, hire experts, and you can come in and get almost anything you want. And that's the problem that I see. So I'm in support of the hard cap on small lakes and the criteria for the larger lakes. And the hard cap and urban centers should not be exempted.
Okay, I know just as a information point, the RCC in Seguin Township, and you can correct me, Mr. McDonald, if I haven't got this correct, proper. It went to whatever it was called at the time, the OMB, the LPAT, whatever, and was upheld. But they did not include Lake Joe and Lake Rosso in that. So it was the smaller lakes in Seguin that that decision was upheld on, just as a point of interest. Councillor Edwards?
Yes, thank you through the chair. And maybe if Mr. Diamond is still on there, it was the province that brought in recreational carrying capacity when they were selling off Crown land, and it was 4 hectares, not 1.6. And I believe if we take the plan that Seguin has and put it in, it will be upheld. So a hard cap on small lakes is desirable. We've heard that from everyone, and I think we should leave it in there. It's going out to the public. Let them comment again, but it is you can defend it, and that at LPAT or Land Tribunal or OMB, wherever it was, it has been successfully done. You take what they've used in Seguin and put it in ours, and it will be upheld. Simple as that. Why reinvent the wheel?
Okay, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, yes, I'm in support of, very much in support of a hard cap for small lakes. Recreation carrying capacity has been around for a long time. There is and always has been science to it. The proponents that say there is no science to it haven't really in my belief, haven't dug into really understanding RCC. And I don't believe recreation carrying capacity, I guess I do believe, is as a label is a misnomer, misleading, and distractive. Lot creation threshold is not mainly being requested to prevent lake surface overcrowding and to address social events. And as I said earlier, I believe that by some of my colleagues here, I believe that the main benefit of the small lakes RCC hard cap would be support of what we have written in the OP lake health objectives. It would support that. It would the possible curtailment of the obvious deterioration of within Muskoka of the lake water quality, and it would protect and support Muskoka's wildlife habitat and ecosystems for invertebrate and vertebrate. In summary, I believe that the RCC cap at this time is very necessary. This is my understanding that Seguin Township, in their new OP discussions, appear to be continuing support of RCC, and it seems to be moving in the direction of an environmental rather than a full focus on just recreation carrying capacity. I think we should be erring on the side of caution, put it in, and then tweak it as we move forward. So that's I really think we need to put in RCC hard cap for small lakes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, and through you. I've spoken out against an RCC hard cap on the small lakes because it does not treat all the lakes the same. The whole idea of having an RCC is protecting the watershed health, and I believe that this is very important. One of the things that I find is if you were to exempt the lakes where gas vehicles are not allowed by policy or lake agreement, I would support RCC in small lakes. That would allow a little wedge room in there because we do want to keep our watershed healthy. And by lake associations deciding not to have motorized vehicles on their lake, I don't think that they should be subject to the same rules that someone has gas boats running around. I think that they're two different animals and should be looked at separately. So I believe there's 2 lakes. I think it's the one in Port Carling, Marion, and Thorn Lake. Both do not allow gas motorized vehicles on their lake. So if those 2 are removed from the list, I would not have a problem with it going out to the public.
Mayor Harding.
Thank you. I think you're going to say that Councillor Roberts' hand might still be up from the last discussion as well. I can put words into your mouth. So I'm going down the same road as Councillor Hayes. I am, from what I know, not in favor of a hard cap on the small lakes. And again, every lake is slightly different, and there are lake plans and there are things that do restrict the type of vessels on lakes. If I'm not mistaken, Butterfly Lake, for example, has certain boating size restrictions. Brandy Lake, I know my brother used to be on. Somebody brought a wakeboard boat on there and they basically got booed off the lake. And I think they took the wakeboard boat away because it wasn't socially accepted on that lake. And if the entire lake and everybody happens to like canoes or sailboats, that's a totally different type of water sports activity than water skiing or whatever. And we heard yesterday, someone said, you know, my kids can't go out and water ski. Well, I grew up water skiing at 7 a.m. because there was no boats and no waves on the lake, is when you wanted to go out and water ski, because as the day got forward, you couldn't ski at that particular point. So the nature of activities, the hour of the day, the boats on the water certainly change. The urban centers change. You know, we can bring 1,000 boats into Port Carling on a given day for the antique boat show. That doesn't mean that the other times of the year or the week or the month that there are 1,000 boats in there. And when you get more boats, people slow down. We pack certain bays because of fireworks. Go to Walker's Point Marina, they go out there and you get 400 boats to watch the fireworks. The behavior of the boat drivers at that particular time changes drastically. And I think people modify their behavior based on the number of boats on the lake in particular. My concern is that we are using RCC as an ability, not to say we want to safe a lake, basically to say we don't want anybody else on our lake. And if I've got a big tract of lake and big tract of land, and that's where I've heard it used, that as a, there's Cardwell Lake, I think we did, there's a couple thousand feet on one shoreline. They wanted to create 3 or 4 lots. And the public said, no, we don't want it. We utilized RCC. Its over capacity wasn't valid. So I think that's the big issue that's going on. And I'm happy for it as a directional perspective as it's written. I'm certainly not happy on the large lakes in any way, shape, or form, because you can come in and out of bays, and at times a bay becomes over capacity or doesn't come over capacity. And I think on the small lakes, let's just let this work as yet another tool in the toolbox, because every lake is slightly different. And let's look at it that way versus making this a hard and fast rule. That's my perspective.
Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you. And through you, I certainly agree with what I'm hearing from the mayor, Councillor Hayes. Short-term rental is no different than RCC, or I always like to refer to it as ECC, because I do believe that it is much more than recreation. It's an environmental capacity. And, we've been talking a lot about the ribbon of life and the 15 feet and the 50 feet. I would think we need to spend more time talking about this with some legal opinions. Again, here we are talking all about the water that we don't even control. And we really aren't. I understand that we are talking about the development of the lands surrounding the bodies of water, but I certainly won't be embracing the notion of some sort of hard stop on this and let's put it in, let's jam it in, and let's see what people think. I think we need to have a lot of discussion as we are. Thank you.
Okay, so I will go back to say it seems to me the presentation yesterday talked about the fact that the small lakes are all different diameters and measurements, and this is something that brings it down to a commonality. So I am actually in support of the small lakes, but I'm wondering, before I go to committee on this, Councillor Hayes' comment about the fact that there are some lakes that don't allow motorized boats. My concern is you can't, I don't think you can enforce that if you have a culture change on that lake. That's my problem with that one. So, Councillor Kelly?
Sorry, through you, and just to follow up on that, I don't understand how you put restrictions other than by private contract. That's an agreement among a cottage association, but it seems to me that unless you sign on to that agreement, there's no legislative ability. If it's navigable waterways, I don't think anybody has any right to tell you what you can use, where or when, or, as long as you're far from shore, at what speed. So I'd like to know more about that. If it exists, I think it must simply be through, private agreement among neighbors, or, a lake association or something. And I think, as Mayor Harding suggested, somebody who shows up with the boat is going to get mocked until they leave. But that's not an enforcement issue. That's just shame. Thank you.
Mayor Harding?
There are some lakes that have VORs on them, vessel operating restrictions, that they will control, and that's through Transport Canada. So that is in perpetuity.
Well, okay. So if we looked at those, Councillor Zavitz?
Thank you. And I just as a comment as well, we have right here a perfect example of what we're discussing, which is the Moon River. There are some places where you could hit a 9-iron across it, no problem. And there's 25-foot wakeboard boats in there. chopping up the water at 9 kilometers and surfing all day. That's got to change. That behavior has got to change, or that ribbon of life is gone. It'll be underwater. People will be up in arms. There'll be shaming, as the mayor has said. So this is just the start of a much bigger discussion. It's not unlike we started with fireworks. This is environmental carrying capacity. This place can't take much more of all this craziness, and we are going to have to ratchet down. So I would be supportive of a longer dialogue, and using the Councillor Kelly's point, the science of it all is very important here. I think just to say let's just put it in here and see what people think. We need to be the intelligent body here. We need to have looked at this and come to terms with it all, and I'm not so sure we have yet. Thanks.
Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I just wanted to reiterate that I believe there should be a hard cap. We should modify this before it goes out. And I also qualified that if there aren't some inequities that show up, we should deal with them. But I think it's time for us to move forward with this on the small lakes. Thank you.
Okay, so I mean, if there are legal restrictions on motorized boat, as you said, Mayor Harding, I would be fine removing that hard cap on those. So I don't know, I'm going to suggest we sort of leave that until the next round, but I'm going to ask committee now, do we want a hard cap on the small lakes to go out to the public for feedback? Who is in favor of putting that hard cap in? 2, 3, 5. I think that carries, Madam Clerk. 5. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to put that in for discussion purposes, Mr. McDonald. Councillor Zavitz?
Thank you. I wonder if we could include, is it lakes and rivers?
No, it's not rivers too. David, Director Pink? Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Okay.
Thank you. I think what would be helpful for Nick and myself, we continue to refer loosely to small lakes. I think a number of the presentations included Skelton Lake, Leonard Lake, rather larger lakes. I just want to be very clear when we're crafting this because it will be released to the public. We are moving back to a hard cap. I take it that is on every water body outside of the big 3 lakes and Skelton Lake. I just think we need clarity from committee as to the RCC hard cap and what it applies to and what it doesn't. As we know, there is a category 3 smaller lakes, which would not capture obviously all of them. There's a medium category as well. So some clarity as to the lakes council wishes to have a hard cap on for RCC would be helpful for Mr. McDonald and myself.
Okay, so my understanding was all lakes except the big 3. I don't know what, no, so all the lakes except the big 3 to go out for discussion. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, that carries. And I know you have a question, Councillor Zavitz.
Again, thank you. I don't think David, if we were intending David to answer a question, he didn't as it relates to the Moon River. That is a recognized water body. It isn't a lake, but it certainly, is a $100 million piece of real estate value, and it leads to the Georgian Bay, and it drains all of the water out of the Muskoka watershed. So why would we not include the Moon River or is that viewed as a large lake?
It's considered to be an open.
No,
system,
I believe
so
the direction, if it is solely the big 3 lakes that are excluded, the Moon River would be included as a hard cap. It would only be those joining rivers of the big 3 lakes, the Joe River, Indian River, that would not be subjected to the hard cap. The Moon River would be.
So if I could ask a technical question, how do you decide what you're measuring? The whole river? It would be the whole river within our jurisdiction. Okay, I just needed the clarification on that. All right, so that will be included then, Councillor Zabit. So I think that is the direction for the RCC. So all I've got left are boathouses, the first floor of boathouses. We have 9 minutes left because we're on a hard stop at 1 o'clock. Does committee desire to get into this discussion today? Can I get a show of hands? Who would like to talk about it? 3 people. Okay. So because I'm quite sure we're not going to finish this discussion today for sure. So rather than start a new discussion and then aggregates, Councillor Roberts, on Friday, whatever you want to talk about with that. So those will be our 2 topics on Friday, Councillor Roberts.
Sorry, when you're completely done, I just want a closing remark. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Jaglowitz.
Yes, sir. I just had a procedural question. We have 2 more meetings scheduled, I believe. Could you just lay out what the purpose of those are?
They're strictly a continuation of this. So hopefully we won't need the second meeting. I would assume that on Friday, we're going to be able to wrap it up because there's only so much you can say. And if everybody starts repeating themselves, I'm not shy about mentioning that. So we should be.
I
Sorry?
understand you correctly. You only have 2 items on your agenda left. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Unless someone else comes up with something, and that's certainly allowed on Friday. But yes, I only have 2 items left on this.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. McDonald, are you good? Any comments?
No comments. This has been very helpful for both David and myself. So very good. And I look forward to the remaining items on Friday. It looks like we'll only need the Friday meeting, which is thankful. I'm thankful for it as well.
Yeah, no kidding. So, and on Friday, we'll figure out the dates for the public meetings too. I know in early August, we'll get those hammered down. So, okay, listen, thank you, everyone. Oh, Councillor Hayes.
Thank you. And through you, if you're talking about the dates for the meetings on Friday, I will not be here. I am better at the end of the month than the beginning of the month. The first 2 to 3 weeks, I am not available.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hayes. I believe we have some other restrictions that are going to keep us in those first 2 weeks. In terms of needing to have Mr. McDonald there. I believe you are booked for the end of August, Mr. McDonald. So, but thank you for that. And Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak. I just want to say that what I did when we were asked yesterday to come up with a list, I really did study what had to happen. But technically, we had 3 business hours, or 4 business hours. But councillors don't work on business hours. But but I threw together what I could without doing a lot of research. So I'm sorry that I appeared today to be stumbling. But I've said this for 4 years, is that when people delegate and they have really meaningful comments and they ask questions, that I believe they deserve councils or committees' time to talk about those. And I believe even though I was stumbling today, I believe we accomplished that in many cases. So the people that delegated yesterday can come to the public meetings and reinforce their points given what they heard today. So thank you. And again, I'm sorry for appearing to be so stumbling, but I had a personal issue that made me come to Toronto yesterday. So I lost a lot of time.
I thought you did a pretty good job from your list, actually, Councillor Roberts. So, okay. So everybody go out. It's a beautiful day and enjoy the rest of the day. And we'll see you back here on Friday morning. If anybody has any more thoughts on wanting something added to the agenda, if you would send me a quick note, I'll just add it in before our meeting even starts. And the resolution, you know what? I was going to miss that again. So thank you, clerk. Oh dear. Okay, moved by Councillor Zabit, seconded by Mayor Harding. Be it resolved Well, nope, it's not that one. Moved by Councillor Kelly, seconded by Councillor Edwards. Be it resolved that the special planning committee meeting adjourn at 12:55 p.m. and the special planning committee meeting be held on Friday, June 24th, 2022 at 9 a.m. electronically from the council chambers municipal offices in Port Carling, Ontario. All in favor? Good work today, team. Thank you so much, and we'll see you Friday.